Welcome to Now for Someone Completely Interesting. I'm your host, Ben Poulin. I've known my guest with me here today now for over 33 years. Yes, I did the math. We met because my older sister was dating his older brother. And while that long-term relationship, I should say, ended after a brief marriage, I like to say that we got each other in the divorce.
Very true.
Yes, we go back far enough as well that at one point his other older brother gave him the nickname Spanky, and for some reason it seemed perfectly appropriate that we call him that. But that will be the one and only time during this podcast that I use that name. From here on in, I'll refer to him by his professional name, Brent Kossey. So even though we've known each other, what seems like, well, let's say what it is. It has been a lifetime, and I know a lot about you. You know a lot about me. There are things that I feel that I'm going to learn about you in this podcast. So one of my longest friendships, and it's taken a long time to find the time to have you on this show. So thank you so much for finally agreeing to do this and having me out here at your beautiful, what do you call it? The Hacienda?
Yeah.
Out here at Lac-Santé. So Brent Kossey, thank you so much for joining me.
No, and thank you so much for having me. And my apologies that it took so long for finally to sit down and to get this going. That's for sure.
Busy lifestyle with twin. Well, are they still toddlers now? I guess.
Yeah, 4 years old, a boy and a girl, Alexander and Isla.
So that's busy and a busy job itself. It's in the realm of politics. So if I were to take a stab at what you do. When people think of like, an election campaign, and whether it's a high profile municipal campaign like Edmonton City Council or the Alberta legislature and provincial elections, we see, the party faithful knocking on door to door. And what we don't really see is that besides all these volunteers, there are people like yourself that get paid to come in. And would it be like a strategist, a consultant?
Yeah, that's
okay.
fair. During campaign seasons, for sure. That's what we kind of do. But there's a lot of stuff that happens in between campaigns.
Okay.
That kind of leads to what I do for a career.
And yeah, and that's what I find interesting and don't actually know a lot about. But before we get to that, we got to dial this back a little bit here because we have known each other a long time, and even just your life growing up, I think, has a lot of interesting and cool stories and aspects to it. So where was it that you actually grew up?
Like I said, I grew up on a farm about 15 minutes west of St. Paul. In between Cork Hall and St. Bride's, Alberta. People know where those two places are. Yeah, just on a small kind of hobby farm that my parents had. Yeah.
Right. What were some of your favorite things about growing up in that area?
Oh, there's some long-term friendships that I have from people that I just would have known, either because of proximity that we were there with. There's just nice growing up in kind of that rural environment, and that was different than some of the friends that I knew that grew up in town.
It was nothing for you to hop on an old dirt bike and rip across the field and meet up with some friends in the area.
Exactly.
Right? So,
and we did that quite often in the evenings, and then played a lot of grass hockey.
Yes.
When people would come over and you talk to other people, they're like, what is grass hockey? Because they played street hockey or whatever. And I said, well, we didn't have a street to play on because there's all gravel.
That's right.
So we played on some like worn down grass that basically turned into just like a hard packed dirt. And that's where we spent many evenings, that's for sure, playing hockey. And
hockey was a big part of your life too, growing up.
Yeah, I'd say it's the first love for sure. what I liked, a diehard for lack of a better term, Oilers fan.
Right.
And but like the game of hockey itself, I don't think it says a lot about Canadians and who we are and what we do and the passion that we have, and it's something that's very close to my heart.
You played minor hockey all throughout growing up in St. Paul,
yes,
correct?
I did. Yeah.
Any favorite memories from those times?
Of course, yeah. There's the friendships that are just made playing competitive sports that people all know for the rest of my life because of those times growing up just playing hockey. But yeah, was lucky enough to be on a team that won provincials in my last year of minor hockey. Some other times winning tournaments.
Not just winning provincials, but on home ice?
On home ice, yeah, for sure. We weren't even supposed to be there. In fact, we were ranked 8th of the 8 teams that were there.
Wow.
In that tournament, and just kind of things came together. And we were also pretty lucky to get some affiliated players from a team younger than us, actually, that came up and who had just won their own provincials.
Wow.
About the weekend before. And so they came up and they were very, very instrumental in helping us win a championship.
It's not often the younger guys bring the experience.
They did, for sure.
Um, education wise, high school and everything in St.
Yeah.
Paul, what were some of your favorite, I guess, subjects and everything growing up in high school?
I love social studies.
Mm-hmm.
That was, history and politics and geography are kind of my main loves when it came to academia on that side. Wasn't a stellar mathlete, that's for sure. But yeah, and I like biology, that kind of stuff. But I was more interested in history and social studies. Those were the ones that I really geared towards.
And I always found too, like growing up, we shared a lot of the same interest, and one of those being like reading comic books and stuff. But every once in a while, you'd turn away look up from my Archie comic, and you'd be sitting there poring over an atlas.
Yeah.
Like geography fascinated you.
That
What was was it just knowing places be relating to historical things?
And like just geographically where they related to me, like where I was.
Okay.
That's what I was interested in. It's just like, there's people around the world who have, different topography and geography all around them. And how is it different or similar to where I live? And that's what just always fascinated me. Always wanted to learn more. There wasn't capitals throughout the world that I wasn't interested in eventually. And I think, that spurred kind of a love of travel, something that I haven't got to do a ton of besides for work. I haven't got to go to places I've always wanted to yet. That's
right.
for sure.
But there have been a couple bucket lists that you did hit up over the years.
I've been to Scotland, Europe a few times, New York and Los Angeles, those kind of things. So, yeah.
So relating back to what you do professionally now, this isn't something you just hopped into and got out of high school, went to university, and said this is the job I'm going to take. First of all, let's go back to obviously we're going to find out. I think that your university degree relates to what your favorite subjects were in high school. What exactly is your post-secondary education?
I went to Augustana in Camrose, which is now a faculty of the University of Alberta. But when I graduated, there was still just kind of a standalone by itself. And I got a history degree straight up with a minor in political studies. It wasn't even political science; it was political studies.
Right. And so a history degree wouldn't exactly guide you into politics per se.
No, I took a convoluted way to get where I am right now. During working in summers during university, I worked at a place that you're familiar with, Fort George,
Right.
in Elk Point, which is a provincially owned historic site talking about the Canadian fur trade.
Right.
And so I worked there every summer. For 5 or 6 summers, probably too many summers than I went to university for, that's for sure. And then when I finished university, kind of the doors that opened to me were kind of in that area. And so then I got a job eventually after a couple of smaller kind of gigs selling insurance and those kind of stuff, working at Rutherford House on the University of Alberta campus. And it was
Right.
just like historical interpreter is what I was called.
Okay.
And I worked there, and that eventually led into working at the Musée Héritage in St. Albert. And I worked at, the Father Lacombe Chapel and Little White School and the Grain Elevator in St. Albert there. I was kind of the manager of their educational program.
Was it then your directive that you were going to get into something more geared towards history?
I was making those museum dollars,
Yeah.
and I was going to go on the management track. So that's something I thought I was going to end up in the history field, in historic site services. I thought one day working for government in that area.
Right,
Which,
right. I noticed tongue-in-cheek museum dollars. You must have, well, I think we related at the same time. I was working in radio, and
Yes.
you were still making a little bit more money
Yeah,
than
so
me. But
my wife was a first-year teacher and has almost doubled my wage. So
Wow.
that was totally something there.
well, when you're working in publicly funded ventures like that, it's
For sure.
yeah.
What it didn't, pay for financially, it did give opportunities for professional development. So
Right.
they could apply for grants, and the museum did itself apply for grants for me to go, and I got a cultural resources management diploma at the University of Victoria.
Wow.
So those types of things, they couldn't pay you, but they could find dollars to help you with your development, which was very nice.
So then that leads to there's I guess a resume of jobs in history in the museums and stuff like that. But I guess the big foray into politics was you actually working at the legislature at the time for the Alberta Progressive Conservative Party.
Yeah, I did. So when my wife and I moved to Vegreville, because she was teaching in Viking, actually, and then I said, I don't necessarily think I'm going to move to Viking. It may be a little bit bigger of a center. So we settled on Vegreville. So I worked there for a little bit, selling insurance. and is at the exact same time that Ed Stelmach in 2006 was running to be the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party after Ralph Klein had stepped down.
Right.
And so that was like my kind of first foray into helping a campaign on that really lower level, knocking doors, handing out buttons.
Was that Stelmach's campaign?
Yeah, because
Okay.
he's from Vegreville. Well,
Right.
he's from Lamont, I guess technically, but he had a lot of support out of
Right.
the Vegreville region. And so that's I started working there a little bit, but it's still at the same time, through that. And then he had won. Then I kept on my museum track, this kind of thing. And then I had some friends that I went to Augustana with that ended up working for the Progressive Conservatives in an area called Government Members Research Caucus. And so these are the people that write speeches for backbench MLAs, the people who aren't ministers.
Right.
And this friend of mine basically every 2 months was like, you should come work for us. Like, politics inside and out. You're a bit older than some of the folks that they had just coming straight out of university, so had a bit of life experience to go along with the passion for politics. And I was still kind of single track mind about I know I'm going to end up in the museum world, this kind of stuff. And then about the fourth time he asked and slid a number across the table, and at the time thinking of a family, that kind of stuff, it's like, oh, maybe I should take a look in this area. And again, it's something that I was like equally as passionate about. Was politics. So it was a bit of a jump because I didn't know completely what I was getting into, but that started kind of my career in politics and in the legislature.
So you said you started out with writing and doing research for the backbenchers.
Yeah.
You did
private members is what I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
You did eventually get advanced to where you were working with a minister.
Yeah,
or a
for
cabinet
sure.
minister.
I was. Yeah.
Sorry, was that because it was someone you worked with eventually got promoted to cabinet, or they just saw your skills at that level? And how does that work?
I wish I could say it was that completely. But you know what? There was a position that came open in the Minister of Agriculture's office.
Okay.
And basically I knew what a combine or a cow looked like when some of my colleagues in the research that time were fresh out of university or grew up in a more urban setting, didn't really know that. So when it came to the interview process, I had a bit more of an idea about what the topic or subject matter was going to be in that ministry. And I was fortunate enough, and they picked me to be the special assistant in agriculture, which that started kind of my way up inside the legislature.
And just because you're working for a cabinet minister, there's higher profiles that come with, I guess, more responsibilities, and you did take on other.
For sure, yeah. It was kind of good or bad timing. I became a special assistant in agriculture, and then there was another kind of leadership review. There was some turmoil at the top there with Ed Stelmach and then Alison Redford getting in, and then another election in 2012. And my minister that I had went from agriculture to tourism, is where he got kind of shuffled during a cabinet shuffle, and the chief of staff that he had at the time didn't want to go there, had other pursuits that he wanted to do. And I straight up asked this minister, who didn't really know about like my history and tourism side background, I had to like say it. I was like, you know what? Because he was looking at other people, and sometimes the premier's offices of the time want certain chiefs of staff with certain ministers. And tourism not being a super high profile one, they let my minister kind of pick his own chief of staff, and he chose me.
Wow.
And so that really helped. And then we moved again after that, and then unfortunately he lost his next election, so I was out of a job.
Right.
And then he put in a good word for me, and another minister actually picked me up who was going into cabinet. Or they had a strong suspicion that he was going to go into cabinet.
And that was back in 2012 yet?
Yeah, that would have been, right after 2012, right after the 2012 election.
And in 2012 election, who was that still Alison Redford at the time?
Yes, she won that election against Danielle Smith.
Right.
Who's someone we could talk about right now. Yeah, continue on.
A name that's coming back into the Alberta political forum.
For sure.
You didn't, and you're no longer with the legislature, and I guess the writing was on the wall that somewhere between 2012 and 2015, the PC party definitely fell out of favor with Albertans.
For sure.
You weren't there to experience the downfall per se. You had left, but not because you saw any. Well, maybe you did. I don't know.
No, I wouldn't say that. Never. A tribute to brilliance, what can be explained by incompetence. So this is where we go. So what happened was had moved a couple of different ministries into infrastructure and into transportation.
Right.
And I was in transportation and working a lot with some of the companies and corporations that deal with the Ministry of Transportation. And there's this kind of, saying, maybe there's some opportunities outside the legislature. And a friend that had worked at CN was taking a higher role position with CN for moving from kind of Western Canada, from Edmonton to Ottawa. And he recommended me for his position in Edmonton that had all of Western Canada. And yeah, I applied for it, and I had to talk to the ethics commissioner and all this kind of stuff to make sure I could leave to basically a railroad
Right.
from the Ministry of Transportation. And they did accept that, and I was accepted for the role, and it led me to CN Rail.
So, okay, so now here's another like small twist. Not to say that you weren't suited for the job because of your background, but did you ever see yourself going in that kind of a direction where you were? What was your role with CN exactly then?
I was the senior manager of government relations and public affairs for Western Canada.
I see. Okay, so
Yeah.
still kind of working with the government, but not for the government.
Not for the government, working for CN Rail about their interests in all the jurisdictions they had. So if it was, going through some towns,
Right.
or through the province, if they ever had a derailment, talking to the whatever minister's office in any of the 4 provinces that I had, giving them a heads up. This happened in British Columbia. This is what you need to know. There is no fatalities or no damage, or if there was, and basically giving them a heads up about that kind of thing.
So I remember visiting you when you were still working this job.
Yeah.
We had gone to a hockey game, the Oilers game, and they beat Vegas 8-1, so that was good, and that was probably the only highlight of the year for them. But going back to your house, kind of unwinding and having a few drinks and playing some darts, I can just remember your phone ding, 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 ding.
It was a stressful job in that way, because the railroad never stops.
Right.
And so there's kind of something going on all the time with it. And there was 5 people in North America who did my job.
Right.
In their own jurisdictions. There's 1 person in the United States, 1 person in Atlantic Canada, 1 in Ontario, 1 in Quebec, and myself.
Okay.
I guess my math is off right now. But anyways, that's who it was. And so it's every kind of 4th or 5th weekend you'd be on call for all of North America.
Oh.
And so when something's happening in Memphis or in Moncton,
Jeez. Must have been one of those weekends, eh?
yeah, then that I do kind of remember that vaguely, because there were so many type of things to deal with
Right.
there. And issues, a mayor is concerned about dangerous goods going through their community. And this is also, post-Lac-Mégantic, like the
Right.
the thing that happened in Quebec that, CN was not involved in that, but that kind of changed people's perception about the railroad.
Right.
And its safety. And CN did a very, try to do the best job they could to make sure they ran the safest railway, all that kind of stuff. And that was just reiterating those facts over and over to mayors as much as possible.
Right.
Yeah.
The stress of the job, did that lead you to seek out something different, or
It
did somebody come to you?
Someone came to me, and yeah, it's. I had some friends who left the legislature and worked in government relations for like oil and gas companies, and they tell you, it's they're busy and stressful jobs, but not on par to what being a chief of staff in the legislature is. And yet, when I went to go do government relations outside the legislature, the job was equally or more stressful than the chief of staff position. So it was something that I didn't necessarily want it to be that way, and but it gave me this vast experience and the network that I built in that role. Like you're across the country all the time, and you talk to every mayor like at least once a week. That there's 400 municipalities that CN went through in my territory, and so you were just dealing with them all the time. Either good things or bad things, or in between things, just touching base. And so that network kind of helped me further my career, and just knowing the people that I could tap later. But yeah, someone came to me from a company and said, "Would you be interested in doing this?" They actually were going to retire.
Okay.
And said, "Brent, I think this would be something you might be interested in." And that was it's basically government relations consulting. So doing kind of what I did at CN, but for a company who works for a lot of companies.
Okay.
Yeah.
But was this the company also that political parties or political campaigns would look towards to consult with? Or
yeah, and that's where it's interesting that these companies necessarily don't do the campaigns themselves.
Right.
like just straight up themselves. But the people within those companies, like, I've worked with some of the best political strategists in this country, and so they're tapped because they want their knowledge on how to run campaigns, and so
Right.
they themselves may take a step away from like their current roles and then run a campaign, that kind of stuff. So
Right.
in my experience, and it does happen where one company will run one individual's campaign, and that does happen. But I have not had that experience
Right.
straight away myself.
So, this first company you worked for, you were there for how long?
4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
Okay. And then,
Kind of been a 14 to end of 17.
okay. And then you moved to where you're at now
Yes.
currently.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
And which is, again, sorry?
A Canadian Strategy Group.
Canadian Strategy. So what is it you do with them right now?
Vice President of Government Relations. So very similar to what I did at Navigator.
Sounds important.
It's a bit more responsibility,
Right.
running a team, but doing the same kind of things that I have been doing, basically since I started with CN. And that is, that was helping CN with its objectives, and now it's helping companies who come to us with their government relations goals and objectives.
Right. So it's not necessarily a straight up political party or political campaign that's looking to you for advice. It could be companies.
No, most of mine it's in between election periods. So we're going into what they call the red zone right now. So those are a lot of my friends and colleagues, both within my company or other companies, that will get involved in campaigns during this time.
Right.
But the companies themselves not so much right now.
But is it just so much as far as I guess making sure that you're following the rules and still being able to support who you want to support, kind of thing? Or
Yeah, no, and there's no set rule that says you have to go support someone, but
Right.
there's someone who kind of aligns with your ideals. That's where you will kind of throw your support behind, or throw your ideas or strategies behind.
having all this knowledge and insight to the political realm, both with working in the ledge, working directly with the politicians, the cabinet ministers, have you ever given any thought to yourself moving into the public foray as far as politics go, or are you happy to sit back and
I've always wanted to. I think there's
Right.
some part of me that always wanted, either to move back home here and to, because that'd be like, my dream almost
Right.
at the end of the day would be to move back to the St. Paul area and run for politics right now. They're represented very well both provincially and federally right now. That's nothing in the cards that I'm thinking about right now, but it is always in the back of my mind, and I'm only in my 40s. There's still time maybe to think about that.
Well, I've always had it in my head, and I don't know why. But maybe you had said it one time when we were growing up that maybe politics was something you would.
It's always there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I just didn't think this was the avenue you would go down. I thought you would straight up, work your way up from
Something.
a volunteer from the party to volunteering on the campaign trail to actually getting your name on the ballot at some point.
Yeah,
But
and it's an interesting topic because a lot of it's timing.
yeah,
I've had friends who've never really wanted to be involved in politics, and then just an opportunity arose where they were living, the person stepped down, and then the nomination came up, and they were fortunate enough to win it.
right.
And then they became a politician just like that. And there's other people that I've known who've all they've ever wanted to do is become a politician, and have struck out numerous times, and but keep on going back.
I'm telling you right now, you couldn't pay me enough to be a politician.
No, and this is another thing right now, which is very difficult. This in the social media age we live in.
Yeah.
You were under a microscope. There's people that tell you that politicians are overpaid and this kind of thing, and they don't need that, and it's kind of there's some forces that want it to be like a race to the bottom. For politicians, it's not the same. We're used to have like lawyers and doctors and upstanding business people in your communities that want to step into that anymore because their microscope is so focused on them right now.
Yeah.
Background. Everyone's got skeletons in their closets, but they don't want them out.
I don't even know if it's that would scare me. I think it's let's take provincially the St. Paul riding here. How many constituents do you have?
Yeah. Thousands.
And
Yeah.
they know you. I know, like our local politicians are fairly approachable and fairly known, and they are always having to deal with something
Yeah.
or many things at one time. And it's because when you're face to face with someone, it's hard to
I think my experience for where I've worked would help me with that. That's for sure. Because I've been in council meetings where you're getting yelled at. This is something that's going wrong. You need help doing this. I was working with the provincial government or even CN. having to take a brunt of those conversations. But that is why you do it. You're
Right.
supposed to help those people. The noble goal of it is to help your peers.
Right.
And that's something that is attractive to me. But how it's done, how the sausage is made right now, isn't always good to watch. That's for sure.
Okay, a little sidetrack here. I wanted to go back. We talked a little bit about travel, your fascination with geography. Was there ever a memorable trip you went on?
Yes,
With a good buddy of yours,
there
maybe?
was a long trip. No, going to Alaska with you and your mother and father and my parents was something that I'll always remember fondly and vividly.
Is there, I bring it up, is there any particular moment or story that stands out with you?
There's a couple that probably aren't repeatable here right now, but
All
one
right.
for sure is them it's your dad and my dad flipping over their canoe in northern British Columbia and losing a whole tackle box full of gear, and your dad this laughing so hard, and then my dad trying to like reach into this like freezing glacier fed
Well,
lake to find these hooks. I'm just like, give up.
this is the thing. It was our canoe. It was my dad's canoe. We took this up with us, and it was an 18-foot long,
Yeah.
full aluminum Grumman canoe. It was massive, and it was wide. And my dad always bragged, "You can't tip this thing. You can't tip it." Well,
You got a short Ukrainian in there, and you can't. That's not what happens.
I don't think my dad was ever happier to be wrong about something in
Yeah.
his life.
He was.
so-
Him laughing. I'll never forget for the rest of my life. Just standing there in this
I'll,
cold water.
I'll can I tell you this on the side, and that I don't want to embarrass your dad in any way, shape, or form, but when this was happening, my dad could barely talk, and he leans over to me and he's kind of whispering. He's like, "I wanted to help him. I just couldn't, because every time I looked, because his jeans were riding down, and
Yeah,
the
they were
water
pulling
was
down.
and the water was going down in his crack, and every time he tried to stand up, the jeans kept coming."
Yeah. No, he was in a bad spot. He got out of there.
And I don't know if my dad ever told your dad that that's why he was laughing so hard, but if he's listening to it, he's going to find out now. I'm sorry, Mr. Kossey, but that was back in 1995, so I think statute of limitations is off now. We're allowed to.
For sure.
You know what? We could do a whole other podcast just talking about fun stuff like that, and not only times we've had. I know you've got a big circle of friends you've had for a long time, and there's some great stories from all of them.
For sure.
That well, maybe you'd have to get the permission to tell too, but
Yeah. Oh no.
before we wrap things up here, again, thank you so much for agreeing to do this and hosting us out here. But the last question. You're here on this podcast now for someone completely interesting. If you had to pick someone, and I'm not saying they have to come on, but just food for thought, I guess. If you wanted to listen to someone on this podcast, who would you recommend?
Oh man, that's you put it in the hot seat all the time, and I'll go because I think someone recommended me within our friend group, so I would go Jamie Morrow. James
yes.
Edward. I think he'd have it's a fascinating story about where he's gotten to in life here, and so yeah, I think he'd be the person that I'd recommend.
I would say a prominent person in our community too now.
For sure.
We never thought as kids he would get that far, but he did it. No,
Exactly.
great guy. We've known him for a long time. And yeah, you know what? I think I'm going to ask him. So thank you for recommending him. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please make sure you find us on your favorite podcast provider. You can seek us out by searching Poolin Radio or Now for Someone Completely Interesting. Make sure you give us a like and subscribe. And you can find us on social media as well by searching out Poolin Radio. Once again, my guest is a longtime, very dear, close friend of mine, Brent Kossey. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.